I have always believed that the most terrifying memories do not come from sci-fi movies, but from things that actually happen in our everyday lives. There is something that happened when I was only 10 years old, during a suffocatingly hot summer night in the countryside, that I still cannot erase from my mind to this day. Every time I see those old attics in suburban houses, my whole body gets goosebumps, and that cold feeling down my spine from that night immediately rushes back. It was a severe incident that completely changed the way I look at safety within my own living space, a place that was supposed to be peaceful. I have never told this to anyone for the past 10 years because I was afraid people would think I was crazy, but today I decided I have to tell the whole truth. It was a day in mid-July, and my parents had to go to the city to handle an unexpected family property dispute and could not make it back in time during the night. I was left all by myself in the 2-story wooden house located deep inside a massive apple orchard in rural western New York. There were absolutely no neighbors around the house, only dense rows of apple trees surrounding the property and the sound of insects chirping out in the yard. Before leaving, my mom repeatedly and carefully gave me a list of safety rules that a kid needed to follow. You must lock the front door, the back door, pull all the window blinds closed, and turn on the hallway light before going to sleep. At that time, I was just a 10-year-old kid, and I felt incredibly excited about being free to watch TV late instead of realizing the danger of being home alone, because I was so engrossed in watching late-night cartoons on the TV screen. I completely procrastinated and forgot my mom's instructions to check and lock up. At around 11 o'clock in the evening, the entire power grid of the town suddenly overloaded and shut down completely on a wide scale. The TV screen went black, and the house was instantly enveloped by a pitch-black darkness, and a terrifying silence began to take over. The suffocating heat of the summer night was surrounding me, but just a few minutes later, the air in the living room suddenly changed in a strange way. I started shivering because a freezing draft came out of nowhere and hit me directly, making me feel that something was not right. I turned on my phone flashlight, trying to check around the house to see if there was any window I had forgotten to close that allowed the outside wind to blow in. I reassured myself that maybe the air conditioning system had just broken down, so the airflow in the house changed pressure abruptly. However, as I walked through the first-floor hallway, the familiar everyday space suddenly became incredibly alien and gloomy under the flickering flashlight. The temperature inside the house continued to drop abnormally deep, becoming so cold that I could clearly see my own breath, turning into small white puffs of smoke in the air. The silence at this moment was no longer normal. It felt like a dead calm before a horrific disaster was about to strike me. When I took my very first steps up the stairs to head back to my second-floor bedroom, those strange sounds started to occur. I heard a steady scratching sound, as if something was using its fingernails or a sharp object to press hard against the wooden planks. That sound was coming from directly above my bedroom ceiling, specifically from the location of the old attic of the house. That attic had been tightly locked by my dad using a large iron chain and a rusty padlock years ago because our family did not use it. I stood frozen in my tracks, holding my breath to listen and realizing that the scratching sound was accompanied by heavy, uneven dragging footsteps. A dull thud of a heavy object echoed, followed by the sound of metal clashing hard against each other before dropping straight onto the wooden floor above. I realized with horror that the iron chain used to lock the attic door had been snapped open by a massive force from the inside. Right after that, the wooden attic hatch was forced open, creating a loud rumbling noise that echoed through the entire space of the second floor. My survival instinct kicked in, and I understood that I was no longer safe and could not run to the first-floor front door because the path was too exposed. I rushed into my room, ducked straight into the wooden wardrobe in the corner, and left a small crack in the door open to look out in utter panic. Through the narrow crack in the wardrobe door, I saw a massive dark silhouette slowly crawling down from the ceiling onto my bedroom floor. It was moving on all fours, but in a twisted, distorted way that was completely unnatural for a normal human being. I had to use both of my hands to cover my mouth tightly, trying not to make even the slightest noise because my heart was pounding furiously inside my chest. The dark shadow stood up, but it did not search for me. Instead, it walked directly toward the hallway outside the room where I had left my dad's wood-splitting axe earlier that afternoon. I heard the cold scrape of the metal blade dragging along the floor, and then the dark silhouette stepped back into the bedroom. as the shadow stopped right in front of my wardrobe door. A flash of lightning from the distant storm flickered through the window, revealing a part of its shape. It was a creature with skeletal, bone-thin legs covered in dried mud and bleeding scratches, as if it had just pushed through a dense briar patch. It stood frozen in the darkness right against the crack of the door, exhaling freezing, musty breaths directly into the tight space of the wardrobe. In its hand was my family's wood-splitting axe, the sharp blade pointing down at the floor as if ready to swing at any moment if it detected my presence. After standing as still as a statue for a few long minutes to inspect the room, the entity slowly turned around, dragging the axe behind it as it walked straight down to the first-floor front door and vanished into the night. I lay completely frozen inside that wardrobe. For hours afterward, my entire body stiff from shock and too terrified to move a single muscle until the first light of dawn broke through the room. Only when the early morning sunlight finally filtered through the window did I slowly force myself to step outside, where I immediately saw trails of dried mud and dark fluid stains stretching all the way from the attic entrance down to the hallway floor. I found the wood-splitting axe left resting right against the first-floor entry door, and upon closer inspection, the handle was still smeared with a layer of an unnatural yellowish slime. Because I was so consumed by fear and desperately worried that my parents would punish me for failing to lock the doors, I used an old rag to completely wipe away the stains and hid the entire incident from everyone. That event left a deep, unseen psychological scar on me, forcing me to sleep with the lights bright open throughout my entire teenage years. 10 years have passed since that night, and I still cannot explain whether the entity that crawled out of the attic was a deeply disturbed intruder or something supernatural altogether. My parents eventually sold the house a few years later because they felt the atmosphere there had become inexplicably gloomy, though they never learned the real reason behind it. I am not sharing this story simply to frighten you, but as a serious, real-world warning for anyone who tends to be careless about their surroundings. When you are staying home alone, no matter how safe your neighborhood seems, always ensure that you have fully executed every single safety precaution without delay. Never take your own safety rules for granted, and always lock every single point of entry tightly before the darkness of the night rolls in. I never thought a summer vacation in rural Oregon could start with such a strange event. It was the final day of my junior year at a massive public high school with over 2,000 students moving in and out every day. That afternoon, while everyone was busy packing up their books to leave school, a teacher asked me to clean out the abandoned lockers at the end of the gym hallway. While I was gathering old books and trash into a plastic bag, I accidentally spotted an old, dusty film camera sitting quietly in the deepest corner of an unlocked locker. The camera was covered in a thick layer of dust and dirt, proving it had been sitting there for a very long time without anyone touching it. When I picked it up and flipped it over to check the battery compartment, my eyes stopped at a highly unusual detail. A piece of paper masking tape, yellowed with age and peeling at the corners, was stuck tightly right beneath the camera's viewfinder. On the tape, there was a handwritten scribble in black ballpoint ink that had slightly faded over time. "Please develop the film roll inside. I have prepared a gift just for you." That short and vague message immediately sent chills down my spine and sparked an intense feeling of unease. A massive question appeared and lingered in my mind right then. Who was this person, and why did they leave a sign targeting me so directly? This school was just too crowded, and it was completely normal for students to leave anonymous notes or pranks on each other's locker doors. Moreover, this locker was located in a blind spot and had no lock on it, so anyone could easily approach it and stuff the camera inside without being detected. I tried to reassure myself that this was definitely just a dumb prank by some classmate or a prankster. Before summer vacation officially started, I shoved the camera into my backpack and quickly left the school to head home, completely unaware that I had just brought along a terrifying danger. I was so consumed by curiosity that I could not wait, so I drove straight to a small photo development shop on the edge of town that very afternoon. The old clerk gave me a slightly strange look when he took the ancient film roll, but he said nothing, and simply told me to come back in an hour, when I received the stack of prints and stepped out to sit in my car. My initial excitement instantly turned into a cold current running straight down my spine. The first photo was a side profile shot of me standing in line at the school cafeteria about 3 months ago. The second photo captured me walking toward the bus stop from behind, surrounded by other students, but the camera focus was locked dead on me. I shakily flipped through the next few photos and realized the level of terror increased with every single image. All of them were stalker angle shots of me in every possible location, from the school grounds and my usual coffee shop to the park near my house. The most terrifying one was the final photo in the stack, taken from a thick bush directly facing my second-floor bedroom window. That picture captured me perfectly as I sat on my bed reading a book in a gray t-shirt, and the timestamp on the print showed it had been taken exactly 4 hours ago. I sat frozen in the car, my breath catching and sweat pouring down, because I realized I was the target of a psychotic stalker. Even though my fear had reached its peak, I knew this evidence was not enough for the police to open a case, since the photos never showed the face or any trace of the person behind the lens. I decided to protect myself by heading straight back home, locking all the doors, and shoving that stack of photos deep into my desk drawer to keep from panicking further. That night, my surroundings felt temporarily safe again, when my two best friends, Tyler and Mason, came over for a sleepover. My parents had left for a business trip early that morning, so the three of us took over the living room, turned on all the bright lights, and played video games on the big TV. The loud game audio and the constant jokes from Tyler and Mason made me slowly regain my sense of security, helping me forget the horror of those afternoon photos for a while. We ate pizza, shouted at the screen, and stayed up late, just like any other normal summer break for 17-year-old kids. Everything was going perfectly, until the clock on the wall struck exactly 2 in the morning. A completely dry, heavy, and frantic knocking sound suddenly echoed from the wooden door, leading down to the basement of the house. That sudden and unnatural sound instantly killed all the laughter among the three of us, turning the living room so dead silent that you could literally hear a heartbeat. The silence completely engulfed the massive living room of our wooden house. I stood frozen right where I was, while Tyler and Mason stared at me with looks of pure terror. The wooden door leading down to the basement from the living room was always heavily bolted from our side with a large iron latch. There was only one single way for anyone to get inside that basement, and that was through the sliding glass door out in the back garden. The knocking sound started up again, coming at a steady pace of 3 taps at a time, as if a familiar friend were standing out there waiting for us. I swallowed hard to force down some of the panic, and slowly took one step after another toward the heavy wooden door. I pressed my ear tight against the freezing wood surface, and strained to catch even the faintest noise on the other side. "Who is down there?" I called out loudly, making my voice sound as strong and firm as I possibly could. A long, suffocating silence stretched out, tightening the atmosphere inside the house to an absolute breaking point. Then, the voice of a teenager echoed up from beneath the floorboards, cutting through the gaps of the wooden door. That voice had a very high, piercing pitch, and it carried a cheerful, friendly tone that felt completely psychotic. "I came to give you the next photo." That single sentence felt like a bucket of ice water dumped over my head, instantly locking my mind back to the film roll from this afternoon. The deranged stalker who took those pictures was standing right behind that door. He had actually tracked down my private home address and breached my safest space without facing a single obstacle. Mason was always a hot-headed, impulsive teenager, and he could not maintain his composure any longer. He lunged straight toward the basement door and used every ounce of his strength to scream through the wood. "You sick freak, get the hell out of here before I call the cops to throw your ass in jail." Mason's sudden outburst shattered any attempt I had of de-escalating the situation and triggered a terrifying chain of events. Right after Mason's scream, the rhythmic knocking on the other side stopped completely. A dead, heavy silence followed, lasting for 2 agonizing minutes while the three of us barely dared to breathe. Suddenly, every single light in the living room cut out, plunging us into pitch-black darkness, and immediately after that, a massive crash echoed from deep inside the basement, sounding exactly like someone smashing through the sliding glass door to force their way into our house. Real panic finally exploded when heavy footsteps began, to slowly stomp down on the wooden stairs. The intruder no longer wanted to hide in the dark and was openly advancing straight upstairs. In the pitch-black space of the house, the three of us could only see each other's completely bloodless faces through the faint light from our phone screens. "Run, fast. Get into my bedroom and lock the door," I screamed out in a panicked voice, breaking the thick atmosphere, and pulled hard on Tyler and Mason's hands to rush straight toward the bedroom at the end of the hallway, right when we managed to slam the door shut and tightly twist the lock pin inside. A loud crash echoed right from the opposite side. The guy was already standing right in front of the door. The metal doorknob began to turn violently and shake in a furious manner, as if it were about to fall right out of its place. When he realized the door was locked tight, the outsider immediately switched to throwing his entire body weight against the wood, creating sickening, dull thudding sounds. He began to scream in a voice full of hatred, losing total control, and sounding completely unlike a normal human being. "Why did you bring more people over? I prepared this gift just for the two of us. Those friends of yours deserve to die. I am going to kill every single one of them." The bedroom door constantly vibrated under his frantic punches and kicks, and the upper hinge had already started to show dangerous cracking lines. In that moment of ultimate crisis, Mason quickly grabbed the metal baseball bat in the corner of the room to take a defensive stance by the door, while Tyler was shaking violently, constantly dialing the police emergency hotline. I used every ounce of my strength, putting both shoulders into pushing the heavy wooden wardrobe to block tight against the room door in order to buy some survival time. The guy outside still did not stop screaming, scratching at the door cracks with his fingernails, creating screeching sounds that made my ears ring. He started rattling off very personal details about my daily routine, from the exact hour I woke up to the color of my bedroom curtains, things that a complete stranger could never possibly know. That terrifying nightmare dragged on for 15 long minutes until a police siren finally wailed from the far end of the neighborhood. Hearing that sound, the guy standing outside the door abruptly stopped all of his violent smashing actions. He left behind a creepy, echoing chuckle, and then the sound of his footsteps rushed back down into the basement and vanished into the silent night. The police force burst into the house right after that and quickly headed down to check the scene in the underground basement. They discovered the sliding glass door in the back garden had been completely smashed to pieces, and a large black backpack was left behind right on the damp dirt floor. Inside that backpack were hundreds of other stalker angle photos of me, taken from extremely private perspectives, along with a notebook tracking my exact school commute schedule and personal habits. The next morning, police detectives worked directly with the school administration to verify the identity of the film camera owner based on the machine's serial number. That was when I heard a shocking truth, directly from the mouth of the police chief. The camera belonged to a male student in the same grade, but from a different campus, someone I had never faced or had any connection with. He had been expelled by the school and placed into a strict juvenile detention facility by court order 3 weeks prior for illegally possessing weapons and threatening to murder other students. That meant he absolutely had no right, and was impossible to be present at school during the final assembly yesterday afternoon. In some sophisticated manner, he had slipped past the school's entire security system and surveillance cameras just to sneak into the gym area and stuff the camera into my locker before escaping the management of the correctional facility. The police force immediately issued a statewide warrant for the runaway student. However, for weeks after that horrific night, their investigation hit a complete dead end. His family had quietly moved away beforehand, cutting off all contact and disappearing without leaving a single trace. The police could not find any clues about his current whereabouts, causing the case to slowly be filed away into cold storage. To protect me, my parents had to spend a large amount of money to install a dense security camera system surrounding the house. They hired contractors to reinforce all the windows with shatterproof tempered glass and added heavy-duty electronic deadbolts. But all those physical protection measures only gave me a temporary peace of mind and were completely useless in healing the psychological trauma. The school administration and the authorities both chose to stay silent to save face, leaving me to live in a space filled with anxiety without any complete answers. To this very day, I am still tortured and haunted by a massive question that has never been properly answered. Why did a deranged person like that choose me as his only stalking target from the start, when a single second of communication had never existed between us? Every time the night falls, and the wind begins to howl loudly through the old pine trees outside my bedroom window, I wake up with a jolt in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat with my chest pounding from a familiar sensation. It is the feeling that an invisible, hateful gaze is still staring dead at me from the deep darkness of the garden. Our wooden house, which used to be my safest sanctuary, has now completely shifted in perception, becoming a cold and deeply uneasy place. The greatest fear does not lie in what already happened on that night, but in the terrifying silence of the person lurking out there. I know perfectly well that his gift has not truly ended, and this nightmare will always wait in the shadows until the day he decides to come back for me once again. I am starting to recount this story after everything has already passed for a few years. That was the period when I had just graduated from college and found an office job with a fairly good salary. I moved back in with my parents in the house tied to my childhood to save on living expenses. Life at that time for me was extremely peaceful and without any significant pressure. Every day I went to work, and in the evening, I returned to my private room to scroll through my phone, read books, or work out. I always considered myself a principled, cautious person who absolutely hated noisy places. On weekends, I usually chose to go hiking or drive around small towns instead of going to parties. My parents were always proud because I never did anything that caused them to worry about my safety. That peace made me believe that the outside world always operated on an absolutely safe trajectory. Until one day, Lindsay, my best friend from college, invited me along with two other friends, Sabrina and Thea, for a weekend getaway. Lindsay's family owned a modern, isolated cabin located deep in an untouched forest in Vermont. It was a house designed in a modern style, surrounded by towering pine trees and completely separated from any residential area. Thea and Sabrina were very excited about this trip because they were inherently people who loved partying and exploring new things. Even though I did not like the hustle and bustle, out of respect for my friends, I agreed to join the group trip. When the car turned into the dirt road leading to the house, I felt a slight sense of unease because the surroundings were too deserted. But the excitement of the three friends traveling with me quickly extinguished the usual caution inside me. We unpacked our things into the room, and the four of us decided to stay together in a large room with bunk beds to have a cozy feeling. Everything on the first day took place completely normally and comfortably, like a real vacation trip. The first day at the cabin passed so peacefully that I thought I was just being overly paranoid. But by the second night, everything began to drift away from its quiet trajectory. It was around 11 o'clock at night, and the four of us were sitting out on the porch enjoying a few beers and playing a light music playlist. Surrounding the house was a thick, solid blackness of the Vermont woods, with only the porch light casting out a few meters. I was leaning back in my chair when I suddenly noticed a strange glow appearing from the distant tree line. It was a flickering beam of light, appearing and disappearing behind the massive pine trees, moving back and forth at a steady pace. I immediately sat straight up, my eyes fixed intently on that dark void. The sound of dry leaves being stepped on made distinct crunching noises in the quiet space. "Hey guys, look over there. It looks like someone is walking towards us," I said in a low, cautious voice. All three of my friends stopped talking, and everyone directed their eyes toward where the light was approaching closer by the minute. The atmosphere froze for a few seconds, and my heart began to beat faster than normal due to the sudden appearance of strangers in such a desolate place. But just as fear was about to take over my mind, a loud laugh cut through the silence. A young, friendly, and cheerful male voice called out from the darkness, "Hi, hello to everyone up there." The flashlight beam dropped to the ground so as not to blind us, revealing three tall young men stepping out from the forest edge. They were dressed in casual sportswear, holding a few cans of beer in their hands, and flashing very bright smiles. Their open appearance and completely harmless faces immediately lowered the guard of our entire group. The three guys introduced themselves as part of another group that was also renting a cabin about a 15-minute walk away for the summer. They said that because they saw the light from this porch and heard the music, they were curious and walked over to say hello to the new neighbors. Thea and Sabrina, being open and social girls, immediately responded with enthusiasm and invited them to sit down on the porch to share some beers. For the next hour, the atmosphere became very lively, with funny jokes and stories. The guys turned out to be extremely polite, intelligent, spoke with moderation, and did not have any crude or over-the-line gestures. Their thoughtfulness made even a picky person like me begin to think that I had been overly sensitive. As the clock struck nearly 1 in the morning, one of the 3 guys stood up and suggested, "Our place has a small bar and better drinks. Do you guys want to go over there for round 2? Thea and Sabrina excitedly agreed right away without a second thought, their eyes filled with excitement. Lindsay hesitated a bit, but under the dragging of the other 2, she also nodded to go along. I looked at the clock, and my exhaustion and strict routine made me not want to prolong the fun into the late night. "You guys go ahead. I am too tired, so I will probably go to the room to sleep first." I smiled and declined the invitation. Thea pouted in disappointment. "You are always like an old lady. But all right, good night then." I stood up, walked inside the house, and carefully locked the main door latch and the living room windows according to my habit. From the bedroom window on the 2nd floor, I looked down and saw 6 figures turning on their phone flashlights, talking and laughing happily as they faded into the trail leading deep into the dark woods. I pulled the curtains, climbed onto my bunk bed, and quickly fell asleep without having any idea that a horrific disaster was starting to fall upon my friends. I had drifted off to sleep without having any clue that their hunting game had only just begun. This next segment of the story is entirely pieced together from Lindsay's account after everything was over. About 2 hours after leaving our cabin, the group had consumed a significant amount of additional alcohol in the living room of the other house. Sabrina and Thea suddenly collapsed onto the sofa in a very abnormal manner. They were not just typically drunk, but completely unconscious, with their eyes shut tight and their breathing heavy. Lindsay, who was the only one sober because she felt a responsibility to look after our cabin, immediately knew something was wrong. She stepped closer to try and shake her 2 friends awake to leave, but one of the men blocked her path. "Just let them sleep here. The bedroom inside is very spacious and comfortable." The man smiled and spoke in a tone completely different from before. The other 2 men began to roughly hoist Sabrina and Thea up by their armpits, hauling them straight into the dark room in the back without asking Lindsay. Lindsay was genuinely terrified, so she tried to stop them and spoke loudly that everyone had to head back to our cabin immediately. The remaining man in the living room instantly dropped his friendly face and stepped right into her personal space with a threatening glare. He began to exhibit coercive behavior, roughly grabbing Lindsay by her wrist and leaning his face right next to her ear. When Lindsay used all her strength to shove him away and screamed, he became aggressive, shouting and throwing her out of the house. "If you want to leave, get the hell out right now and stop ruining our fun." The man roared and shoved her hard toward the main door. Lindsay was sobbing as she ran for her life out of that house, stumbling along the dark trail to get back. About halfway through the woods, she suddenly froze when she realized she had left her purse behind in their living room. Inside that bag was all her identification, her wallet, and most importantly, her car keys. Fear was skyrocketing, but desperation forced Lindsay to make the decision to turn back to that house to retrieve her belongings. Just as she rounded the path near the iron fence, on the side of the property, the headlights of a large vehicle suddenly flashed, blindingly bright. Lindsay immediately hid behind a dense bush and witnessed a scene that made her heart stop. Through the vehicle's lights, the 3 men were roughly carrying Sabrina and Thea out toward the parking area on the side. Both of our friends were completely incapacitated at this point, with their hands and feet tightly wrapped in multiple layers of gray duct tape. The men coldly loaded the 2 girls into the trunk of a large black SUV. The sound of the trunk slamming shut made a hollow, ruthless click in the quiet night air. The black SUV revved its engine loudly, its tires grinding against the gravel before speeding away toward the main road out of the forest. The safety barrier had been completely shattered, as this was no longer a misunderstanding but an organized kidnapping. Lindsay knew she could not confront armed men directly, so she sobbed uncontrollably while running at full speed back to our cabin. As she sprinted through the pitch-black woods, her fingers trembled violently as she dialed the emergency number for the police, and then called me. Lindsay's FaceTime call rang continuously at 3:15 in the morning. dragging me out of a deep sleep. I answered with a groggy voice, but her muffled screams through tears on the other end woke me up instantly. Thea and Sabrina have been kidnapped. They tied them up and put them in the trunk of a black SUV. Get my car keys from the shoe cabinet and chase them right now. I already called the police. My entire body froze, a feeling of intense fear ran down my spine, and my heart pounded wildly as if it wanted to jump out of my chest. I did not have time to think, immediately scrambled out of bed, grabbed a jacket, and sprinted down the stairs to the first floor. My hands were shaking so violently that I almost dropped Lindsay's keychain right when I pulled it out from the side of the cabinet. I threw the main door wide open, pressed the remote control button to open the iron driveway gate, and jumped straight into the driver's seat of Lindsay's sedan. I started the engine, slammed on the gas pedal, making the tires grind heavily against the gravel ground, and sped out onto the main road outside the forest edge. The space outside was pitch black. Night fog was starting to roll in, and there was not a single vehicle passing by. I held the steering wheel tightly with both hands while keeping my phone on speaker to maintain a continuous connection with the police dispatcher. The dispatcher's voice came through very firmly. "We have located your call. The 2 nearest patrol cars are approaching the West Dirt Road. Stay calm and report to us if you see the black SUV." I drove at a terrifying speed, tearing through blind curves deep in the forest without a single thought about my own safety. Only about 4 minutes later, my headlights swept across a large black vehicle silhouette, moving slowly on the stretch of road ahead. It was the exact black SUV matching Lindsay's description. I see the car. He is going slowly at the stretch near kilometer number 4, close to the highway exit. I shouted into the phone. The dispatcher immediately ordered, "Reduce your speed right now. Keep a safe distance of at least 50 meters so as not to alert the suspect. The police are right behind you." I shuddered, slowly letting off the gas pedal and turning down my high beams to blend myself into the darkness behind him. Just a few seconds later, from the rearview mirror, the familiar blue and red flashings of police cars began to appear and rushed up at a very fast speed. 2 large patrol cars bypassed my vehicle, blaring their sirens loudly, and then executed a spectacular pit maneuver to pin the black SUV tightly against the roadside. Everything unfolded like a breathtaking action movie right before my eyes. 3 police officers stepped out of their cars with weapons in hand, aiming directly at the black SUV's windshield and shouting loudly, "Step out of the vehicle and put your hands high up." Right now, the 3 guys stepped out with dazed faces. They were completely caught off guard and had absolutely no chance to resist, as they were pinned hard onto the hood to be handcuffed. Another officer quickly approached the back of the SUV, using a tool to forcefully pry open the tightly locked trunk. When the trunk door popped open, my heart squeezed tight when I saw Sabrina and Thea lying curled up on top of each other in the cramped space in the back. Their mouths were taped shut with gray duct tape. Their hands and feet were bound tight, and there were many bruises on their faces from bumping around during the vehicle's movement. I rushed out of the car, running over to hug my friends, while the medical personnel began to move in to give them first aid. After everything was brought under stable control, the police investigation at the scene exposed a spine-chilling truth. The cabin that the 3 guys led my friends to did not belong to their families at all like they had advertised. It was the property of an old local couple who were away on a long vacation in Europe, and the house was locked and empty. These 3 guys had pried open the back door lock to break in illegally and turn this place into an ideal hunting ground. Their entire plan, from the night walk, pretending to be friendly neighbors, to talking politely, was a perfect trap staged in advance. They specifically targeted groups of young female tourists from the city coming here for vacation to commit serious criminal acts. I stood frozen in the cold of the late Vermont night, feeling a shudder run through my entire body as I understood the truth. If that night I had not stubbornly refused the invitation to stay home and sleep, perhaps I would have become the 3rd victim lying inside that dark trunk. My family jumped through a lot of hoops and used their legal connections to keep this whole nightmare completely hidden from the public sphere. They wanted to protect our identities and make sure no media outlets or true crime channels could ever exploit our stories. At the same time, they hired top-tier trial lawyers to ensure those 3 men received the maximum prison sentences possible. The legal process moved forward aggressively, and the evidence against them was completely overwhelming. For breaking into a private home, kidnapping, causing bodily harm, and using illegal substances. The judge put them away for a very long time. Justice was served, but the psychological aftermath left behind was an entirely different battle to fight. Sabrina and Thea had to go through years of intensive therapy just to cope with the trauma of that night. They became deeply triggered by tight spaces, pitch darkness, and even the sound of a car trunk slamming shut. As for me, the incident completely shattered my sense of safety and made me extremely antisocial. I stopped going on trips, refused to visit isolated areas, and looked at every single stranger with intense suspicion. Every night before going to bed, I had to double-check the window locks 3 or 4 times just to get a few hours of restless sleep. The shared trauma was so heavy that the 4 of us actually drifted away from each other for a decent while. Seeing one another was a constant trigger, as if looking into a mirror that immediately flashed back to that night in Vermont. Fortunately, after several years passed and our emotional wounds began to scab over, we made an effort to reconnect. We started meeting up for dinners and catching up on our lives, but we maintained an unwritten rule to never bring up the past. Now, whenever I look back at the chain of events from that weekend, I am still paralyzed by how much of my survival relied on pure luck. I realize that the boundary between a perfect vacation and a living hell depends entirely on a single insignificant choice. What if I hadn't been so stubborn about going back to my room to sleep early that night? What if I had tagged along with them to that other house and ended up drugged and unconscious too? If I had done that, I wouldn't have been at Lindsay's cabin to answer her FaceTime call at 3 in the morning. And if I had delayed our reaction by just a few minutes because I couldn't find her car keys, that black SUV would have made it to the highway. Once they hit that open road, the police would have never been able to track down those men or save my friends. An ordinary, boring choice to sleep early turned out to be the exact thing that kept all of us alive. To this day, every time I lock a door or look closely into a large mirror, I am instantly reminded of the lesson I learned at 22. This world is filled with calculating predators, and the most dangerous monsters always hide behind the friendliest smiles.